Welcome everybody. Welcome, I think it's Santa Lucia. We don't have Santa Lucia here, but we have someone from Italy here, close by from Santa Lucia, I think. Our eminent Bo Rothstein, who's going to speak about the shadow of the Swedish right. Was unsuccessfully tried to retire from the Quality of Government Institute that he founded and built up, but I think he still is there, at least 20% or something. He used to have the August chair in political science in Gothenburg, and before that he was in Uppsala, and before that, going way back, he received his PhD in political science at Lund University in 1986. With the famous book Den socialdemokratiska staten. Reformer och förvaltning inom svensk arbetsmarknad och skolpolitik. And just thinking about today, this kind of topic is kind of still very much discussed. But and not only that, he has actually got the Swedish King's Medal, 8th size, the Order of Seraphim, for a significant contribution in the field of political science research. I kind of agree with the king there. Most importantly, he's in many years affiliated at the Institute, spending a couple of weeks here every year, which we're very happy about. He has, of course, written immensely, very well known for his research on corruption. That has, I think, completely changed the field. But also lately, and that I think connects to today's talk, he has published this book, Grundbulten, about the future of liberalism and socialism, or whether they converge. And actually also, I can recommend, he has published an article in English on this, the idea of liberal socialism. With that said, we are looking forward to hear about the shadow of the Swedish right. Bosse, the floor is yours.
Thank you. First, I want to say this is my last day of a 3-week stay at this marvelous, fantastic institute. And I want to thank all my colleagues here for a very, very good time. Hope to be back, but you have to talk to him. This is an article I published earlier this year, and one should of course not present things that are already published, but this will be part of a book that I'm working on in English. So all smart and illuminating comments and so are most welcome and will be very useful, I hope. Yeah. So let's start with the question that I was asked by the editors of this journal to try to write about. Is this a paradigm shift in Swedish politics? What will be the most likely changes of this election we had? Why did it happen? And is there still something that could be called a Swedish model in Sweden? And lastly, the question I got from the editor, this election, does it mean a threat to the Swedish democracy? We have democratic backsliding in the world, and this is, of course, for the Journal of Democracy, a very important question. Yeah, we have, as many of you know, the Tidö Accord. It's focus on crime, immigration and climate policy. The SD is formally not in government, as you know, but in the cabinet office. They have a special office with SD special advisors. This is a new type of parliamentarism, that you sort of have parties who are in the majority in the parliament, but who support it, but who are not in the cabinet. But this was actually invented by Göran Persson many years ago. First with the Center Party, who had this construction, and later on with the Green Party and the Left Party. So this is actually not something new that has been invented by this new Prime Minister. It goes back to the Social Democrats in the 1990s. So the SD is a quite phenomenal party. It's utterly, I tried to look at, but I cannot find a party who have increased its share of voters in 8 elections in a row. This is unique. Every election they have gotten more votes since they started very small, but still. Who is then the typical SD voter? As you know, this is now the second largest party. It's a man, usually with low education, often living in rural areas and in small towns, single, working class, or small business owner, and actually a person that is not very interested in politics. All this is data from the SOM Institute in Gothenburg. And also a person who are not likely to attend cultural events. So this is, if you sort of have an image of the, maybe a little caricature, but this is what you get from the data if you look. This is person who is not singing in chorus, I can say, to my former collaborator Robert Putnam's big idea about what makes democracy work. So now this protest voting, as you can see it, is from one perspective a little strange. If you look at all the global rankings of Sweden, and there are about 50 such rankings, but Sweden comes out fairly well. Number 10 when it comes to low inequality, quite high when it comes to competitiveness. This is from the World Economic Forum. Government effectiveness, civil liberty, freedom of corruption, GDP per capita, institutional quality. So it's of 170 countries, we are countries doing quite well. So why this sort of protest? But we should say one thing. We used to be number one in the Nordic countries for many, many years. No, not so more. We are clearly beaten, of course, by the country with the unmanageable budget surplus, Norway, and also Denmark, and in many cases Finland. I've been also working with this satisfaction with life, also known as happiness. And as you know, the last 6 years, Finland is, according to the measures, the most happy country in the world. A little strange if you look at the movies, the recent movie, for example, about the autumn leaves, but still. An interesting thing, if you go to the election study people at my department, we see clearly one major change since the 1960s, and that is party identification is going down and down and down. People do not think of themselves as belonging to a specific party. Here you had 2 out of 3, and now it's 1 out of 3 who think of themselves as I'm a moderate, I'm a social democrat, and so on. One of the main surprises in this election is we see an enormous gender division. As you can see here, I see if I can point with this one, I'm not sure. No. I don't need to. You can see here the left parties have many, many more women, and the right-wing parties have many, many more men, especially the Sweden Democrats. Actually, if you look at young people, I think 18 to 30, there you see the biggest division between men and women voting for the Sweden Democrats. It's, I think it's about 10% of young women and up to 30% of young men. And if you go back, the data is actually from 1946. You can see that women and men are changing sides. It used to be that women were more to the right. Now it's clearly a huge part of female voters who vote for left parties. And you also have a strong, if you look at sort of what men and women think, there are strong divisions when it comes to opinion. 16% of women, of men, to this question, should we reduce Sweden's international aid? There is a 16% divide. More women think this is a bad idea. Accept fewer refugees, 13%, reduce taxes, 11%, support multiculturalism, reduce social assistance, longer prison sentences, reduce income equality. All those women are more to the left than to the right. And here comes, for me, a first surprise in this election. We didn't see any feminist mobilization for Magdalena Andersson. I was waiting day after day after day during the election campaign. Here, you know, as many of you know, we have quite a number of very vocal and well-known feminists. I was waiting for sort of op-ed articles saying, now we have the first female Swedish prime minister. Norway got one in 81, Denmark 2011, Finland president in 2003, 2000, and prime minister. So we have been a very latecomer when it comes to having a woman as prime minister. And Andersson was, as you know, never elected. She was appointed. So she was then losing her first election against a conservative candidate, strongly supported by a populist nationalist party, for which gender equality is not very high on the agenda. So this was one of the main surprises for me. And the difference, as you know, was very small. 6.5 million accepted votes, and the total difference between the left and right for 46,000. So if the center-left bloc would have had received 23,119 more votes, we would have seen another majority. This is a fraction of a percentage, of course. So it was a very, very small margin here that made this change in government. Now, if you look at the percentages voting for the Social Democrats and the Sweden Democrats, as I said, most Sweden Democrats voters are, or many are workers. It's actually, if you ask people which class they belong to, there are more workers voting for the Social Democrats than the Sweden Democrats, I think 30 to 26. But if you go to the actual work they do, you see a difference. If it comes to industrial and transport worker, it's many more Sweden Democrats, construction workers also, agricultural workers also, unemployed, not much, actually more to, and sickness benefits, it's not so many. College education, of course, fewer, middle class even fewer. What is the main thing if you ask for sort of subjective classes? Many women who are working in the public sector, like nurses or below nurses, undersköterskor, who vote for the left here. A second change that has surprised me, my last master's student, he didn't know what to write about, and I had an inkling that something had changed in the rhetoric from the Social Democratic Party. And so he wrote a master thesis going through the big speeches leaders of the Social Democratic Party give at the party conferences when they are elected and so on. Here you see a very interesting change in the rhetoric. Until Ingvar Carlsson, the rhetoric was very much to lift the working class as a class, including the middle class, you know, all those reforms we had. With Mona Sahlin comes a very different rhetoric. Now the most important thing is that you can do, I don't know the English word, klassresor, that you can leave the working class. This is the most important thing for her when she makes her speeches, again and again and again, both in the election and so. So, I wrote an article from class party to travel agency. But of course this sends a quite complicated message to many working class people or young people who want to be, you know, a traditional, highly skilled, and these people, as you know, earn a lot of money as plumbers and carpenters. So that's to be a loser. And of course, for a working class party, say the most important thing you can do is to leave the working class. That's the successful life, to become a low-paid librarian or social worker or whatever. I think this has had an important reason why you see this basically split in the working class between half of them are working were voting for the Social Democrats, half of them are voting for the Sweden Democrats. Also, a third explanation, for low-educated men, increased immigration of young males implies, sorry for misspelling it, of course, increased competition for jobs, increased competition for housing, and increased competition for female partners. It's not unreasonable from a sort of micro-level perspective to understand this gender gap here. What is the change in popular opinion? This is again from SOM data. Since we started measure this, I think this is back in the 1980s, there has always been more people saying it would be good if Sweden took fewer refugees. So this great immigration policy has been an elite project that did not have a big support among the Swedish electorate. But the interesting thing here is that 2014 these lines meet. So there are as many who say yes and no, and then after 2014 it goes like this. So here you can see a clear change in the opinion that we were on the sort of, that we had about a split in 2014, and then comes the big refugee crisis, and then opinion goes like this. And I think one thing that is forgotten in the debate about this is that sheer numbers count, you know. In 2016, Sweden took 163,000 refugees. How should we think about this number? Well, we should think about it as a proportion to the population, of course, and compare. So if the US would have taken a similar proportion, they should have let in 5.4 million refugees. They took 96,000. If the UK would have taken it, would have been almost 1 million. They took in 40,000. Denmark, Norway, Finland, about 30,000 each. And here I think is one of the reasons for the great success in the 2018 and 2022 election of the Sweden Democrats. Since all the other parties united on one point, the voter who would say, I support the comparatively generous immigration and refugees policy, let's take 3 times of what Denmark take, had nothing to vote for except for the Sweden Democrat. Democracy is about presenting alternatives, and there was no alternative for those who were, of course, there are racists, but also a little skeptical towards this big influx of immigrants during a very short period. Had nothing else than the Sweden Democrat to vote for. All the parties united on one point. And that is, of course, to open the door for the Sweden Democrats, I think. Yeah, this I maybe don't need to talk so much about this, but my personal experience is that there are quite a lot of immigrants who now live in areas where there is nothing Swedish to integrate into. Integration, by definition, means that there must be something to integrate to, but they live in areas where there is nothing to integrate to. Preschool teachers are not Swedish, they don't speak correct Swedish. Teachers in the lower classes are the same. There is nothing Swedish. And Sweden, as you know, is a labor market, at least if you want not to work in the shadow economy, with quite few low-skilled jobs. To drive a taxi in Sweden, you must have basic English, and you must know how to handle a computer-based system for getting customers. So you cannot put, you know, someone who is almost illiterate into a cab like you can in the United States, for example. Young immigrants, and this is of course the very interesting and high quality research from Janne Jonsson and Carina Mood here, they are actually doing quite well in education and the labor market. Not all of them. There is a group of young immigrant men who have come to Sweden after they are 9-10 who are not doing well. But overall they're doing well. But as they also show, there is actually difficult to change moral norms that are important to many Swedes, norms about gender equality, HBTQ questions, role of religion, upbringing, divorce, and so here we see very little change among immigrants. There is a big division here, and this shouldn't come as a surprise. This is the well-known Engelhardt Welzer word cultural maps. Here they have if self-expression or survival is the important thing, and here if traditional or secular values. And it's well known, you know, Sweden is at the extreme up here. And the country then get many immigrants from here. This will be a complicated thing, of course. We are the most extreme countries when it comes to secular values and also when it comes to self-expression values. Yeah, another surprise in this election was, of course, the law and order thing. Used to be, according to the SOM data, of very little importance in Sweden, and not so anymore. It's not, if I understand the data, that we have actually more crime now. But there is, I think, a qualitatively new type of criminality in Sweden. And at the local level, I think you see a correlation between SD voting and fear of crime. And Sweden is actually number 2 in Europe when it comes to firearm homicides. So I think this new qualitatively different type of criminality has played a role here. We read almost every day about gang violence and gang shooting. And this has come up very high on the agenda of Swedish voters. Yeah, here you see some well-known faces. The search of political populism around the world. This is the newest one, this guy from Argentina. There are also leftist populists here, I want to stress. Now, I think it's important to stress that there is a different thing going on here. That, as is well known, the populists, they base their political mobilization not on the standard left-right dimension, but they put forward the division between the sort of clean-hearted but misled people versus the corrupt, self-serving political elite. And for them, the elites include not only established political parties, but also various groups of experts and professionals, the media elite and the cultural elite. So, and the experts are not seen as impartial or having any useful knowledge, but as serving the corrupt political establishment. So professors, medical experts, and so they are serving this. And according to the populists, this is maybe a little caricature, but there is no such thing as impartial expert knowledge that can inform political decision. Everything is political and a form of power, and this is actually quite similar to what the postmodernism and the Foucault dimension of politics argue. I think this is a little surprising. And what does the ruling populist party do when it rules? This is a paraphrase of a title of the book of the famous Swedish Marxist and sociologist Göran Terborn. What does the ruling class do when it rules? Almost all research about populism is about explaining, and as I've done here, why an increasing number of voters support populist party. Who are they? Where do they come from? What are their motives? And I argue, and as I've shown here, I think this is important, but there is one thing that is missing in this discussion about populism. That is, what do they actually do when they are in power? And the answer from one of the most, I think, knowledgeable scholars about this, he say they colonize the state. John Werner Müller. This is his expression. There is, of course, this Oxford Handbook of Populism. And I like these handbooks, not to read them, but to see what is not in them. That is what I use them for, much. And if you look at the index entry, there is nothing about public administration, public policy, bureaucracy, implementation, public management, experts, civil service. This is a blank. And I'm basically, as many of you know, not a political scientist. I'm a public administration scholar masquerading as a political scientist. So, you know, in liberal democracy, we actually rely a lot about experts giving advice to elected politicians. We have independent courts and the rule of law. We should have academic freedom, autonomy for universities. Cultural institutions should not be directly governed by the majority. We don't want the local mayor elected to decide which books should be in the library or which plays should be played at the local theater. We think there are, I'm not sure they are, but we think there are experts here who can sort of say what is quality and not quality when it comes to art and culture. So we let them decide. Central banks, I'm not sure about this, but okay. We want independent organizations, the National Audit Bureau who audit the public sector should be independent, medical profession, and there are many other professions or semi-professions in the public sector who we give a lot of autonomy because we think that they have some knowledge that can be useful and that is not sort of politicized. This, of course, leads to recruitment and promotion based on meritocracy. And from this Quality of Government Institute we have in Gothenburg, we can clearly show that meritocracy have many positive outcomes when it comes to reducing corruption and valued outcomes like population health and so on. So all this, if you think about it, democracy gives the sort of elected majority quite limited role. Is there a problem here in the Swedish constitution? As political scientists, we love to read the constitution. There is a problem here, and it's this statement: the public sphere must work to ensure that ideas of democracy become guiding principle in all areas of society. This, of course, could be interpreted that the elected majority decides in every spheres of society. Well, I say maybe not. This is not really a good idea, I think. So, my view of populism is that they are not undemocratic, but they have an idea of democratic totalitarianism, as I've coined it. The political majority should basically have total power over the public sector. Every public institution and public policy should mirror the will of the people as understood by the populist party. So this, of course, has resulted in many countries attacks on independent courts. Nancy Bermeo, also a very respected scholar in this field, she speaks of executive engrandissement. They sort of, the executive becomes much more powerful here. And Werner Müller, as I mentioned, colonizing the state. And this means that recruitment and promotion should be based on political loyalty and affiliation with the ruling party, not sort of merits. And the populists think that there is no legitimate ground for power in the public sphere outside the ideology of the ruling party. This is an example. This is not only right-wing populism, it's actually also left-wing populism. The president of Mexico, the leftist López Obrador, He is firing more than 180,000 civil servants and is introducing political patronage all over the place. You cannot be the principal of a school or run a post office if you not belong to the party. And one of the Mexican colleagues, he says, López Obrador approaches public administration as a landlord relates with its servant. He can snap his fingers and reduce the salaries. He can fire them if he wants. He can change the working schedule from one day to the other without taking care about what the law says. So this is the extreme populist, but the interesting thing, this is from a leftist populist here. And we have this, of course, democratic backsliding, and I would like to put attention on a very, very new paper by my collaborator Jan Tirell, who is a political scientist now here in Stockholm, and a young colleague to him, Per Andersson. They just put it on the net. It's based on Largian statistics, of course, some between 150 and 170 countries. And what they find is that to explain democratic backsliding as it can be measured, it's not popular support for or satisfaction with democracy, doesn't mean anything, not low economic growth, not political polarization, not civil society strength, not economic inequality, and not, as many political scientists have thought of, that presidentialism is the thing. No, and not oil rents also. There are two things they find. Size of population, so big countries de-democratize more, and the level of corruption. That's the only two factors they find. And I think this is really interesting news. Is there corruption in Sweden? Then, can this explain the Swedish case? Probably not. According to our studies, bribes are very, very rare. If you ask Swedes, have you been asked to pay a bribe to some public service, it's less than 1% to say yes. This is also what expert surveys show, that this is very low in Sweden. But there can be other forms of perceived unfairness. And I would like to point out this type of identity politics that translates into preferential treatment. This is an American philosopher and public intellectual, Mark Lilla. When he tried to explain the success of Donald Trump, he writes, in recent years, American liberalism has slipped into a kind of moral panic about racial, gender, and sexual identity that has distorted liberalism's message and prevented it from becoming a unifying force capable of governing. If you are going to mention groups in America, you had better mention all of them. If you don't, those left out will notice and feel excluded. This is one of my favorite books. Arlie Hochschild's Strangers in Their Own Land. Maybe some of you have heard of it. It's made a big splash in the United States. What she has done is to live basically 5 years in Louisiana among white working class people. This is exemplary ethnographic work. They live very hard life. It's tough. They are not sort of down and out, but it's a hard life for them. And she has interviewed them and been with them a lot, and her picture of them is they have become strangers in their own land. They think that they have been standing in line waiting for the American dream to also happen to them, but it doesn't. And they blame all this type of preferential treatment to minority groups who they say are jumping the queue. Empirically, they are probably completely wrong, but this is their mental view of what is going on in the United States. And they are, of course, when I spoke to her, when I met her in Oxford, they are the Trump voters, basically. They feel excluded. So, what to say? Is the Swedish democracy under threat after this election? Should be an alarmist. There were two civil rights defenders, I think yesterday in Dagens Nyheter, who were pointing at a number of problems here. I'm a little sort of in between here. I mean, there is no history in any of the Nordic countries of a democratic collapse. We should remember that all the Nordic countries survived the 1930s, for example. We also didn't go into McCarthyism and things like that during. There was illegal registration, yes, in Sweden, but not of the size. I think also the EU membership, that is a sort of defense for democracy, seems secure. We see no Swexit, not even the Green Party or the Left Party or the Sweden Democrats are arguing that we should leave the European Union. We have courts and judges who are basically non-partisan. In the United States, everyone knows if a judge is a Democrat or Republican. When I speak to Swedish judges, I'm quite often invited to give talks to them. They would rather commit harakiri and tell which party they vote for. I think they are utterly careful to keep this impartial image, at least, of what they do. I think we still have a fairly strong civil society that is defending. But the Sweden Democrats, as many of you know, are expressing strong support for the type of illiberal democracy that we have seen in Hungary. And I think the Swedish model is no more. I think what this election shows is that almost 100-year alliance between the industrial working class and the intellectual culture left is over. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Bo. I'm sure there will be questions, and since we have an audience both online and a very big audience here, I can just tell that you are online. You should write your question in the chat, and we allow for hands, which is a new question, but also follow-ups, which is a finger if you're here, and you write in the chat, and then you write who you're following up to. And since I'm a mixed researcher, I like to file questions from different disciplines. So if you write in the chat also your area of what area you are in, and even tell it here. With that said, do we have a first question, or is it complete? Everybody's convinced.
Yes.
By Bo, and there's no questions to be asked. Okay. You know, there is somebody over there. Joseph, you can get a mic.
Yes, thank you so much for this fantastic presentation. My question is about the size of the working class and how it developed since the 1980s.
Yeah, there is a think tank, Catalyse, who had this big class project resulting in a 600-page volume. And as they measure it, they would say that the working class have not shrinked much. But they include groups that I would say are on the border. The industrial working class is now about the traditional, about 10% of the workforce. So yes, there is a change here. But I think if you, according to the subjective measure here, there is not much change since the Sweden Democrat came into the parliament. But I don't have the figures in my head now. But I mean, what you do, there are many groups who work, for example, in the public sector or in service jobs in the private sector that we don't think of as the traditional industrial working class. but who are low paid and have very little autonomy in their work. So in this project, where a number of very able sociologists participated, they would say that the working class is still clearly the majority in the workforce. But that's debatable, of course.
We're happy with that? Yeah. Let me jump in and ask a quick question, because you said this about you had no alternative to vote when it comes to the speech engine immigration. Then you mentioned EU membership, and you said, well, that's secure now because even the Swedish Democrats in favor of that. But for a long time, they were, I think, the only party that was actually critical and in favor of leaving the European Union. So there you had no alternative. I mean, the left party left there, kind of, and they kind of went a little bit pro it, but lukewarmly. They're still,
Oh,
so
yeah.
if you are very kind of skeptical about European Union membership, I guess still the Swedish Democrat is the party to vote for.
Definitively, if you want that we should pay less money and not be governed so much by the European Union.
And if you look at other parties,
I'm just thinking. I'm thinking like the European Union as a sort of bulwark against democratic backsliding,
I see.
as they have tried with Hungary and tried with Poland. But of course, they are the most, well, maybe together with the Left Party and the Green Party, skeptical about the European Union. But there is no big. I mean, I was in Britain 2016, 2017, and lived Brexit, and there is nothing that comes close to the Brexit
so you don't
popular mobilization in Sweden.
So
That's
you don't
my
think
simple argument.
One reason for them going up is that people skeptical about the European Union move to the Swedish Democrat.
Yeah, could be, but I don't think
You
that's
have no numbers or studies on that. I should ask Pontus. He might.
Yeah,
know from
I don't have those figures in my head. I think the main thing is the immigration thing. Period.
Of course.
Yeah.
Very good. So then we have the next lady there. You can get the microphone somewhere from there.
Thank you, Bo. This was really interesting. I was wondering, and my name is Lynn Lorpod. I'm at the Stockholm School of Economics. And so the obvious question to me becomes a little bit following up on the class question. How does education and income inequality and so on play into populism? Because if I have my Swedish history correct, I think a lot of the class travel, at least correlated with education, happened in the 70s already, where very many from the so-called working class or blue-collar side, combined with a Swedish investment in education, really led to many of those in power positions today have done quite a class travel through education. So I was just wondering if you could think or comment on, kind of the class. I loved your travel agent analogy, but also correlated to income inequality and education. Thank you.
Yeah, it's clear that income inequality in Sweden has gone up, and actually quite dramatically. We're starting from a quite low income inequality, but I think Sweden now is, at least according to some measure, the OECD country where income inequality has gone up the most the last 15 years. Yes, it's come from but again, I refer to my colleagues Tyrell and Andersson. They don't see an effect of increased economic inequality on democratic backsliding in the world. Now, if you would specify and look to Sweden, you may come to another conclusion. But that it has to do with income inequality. But if I remember correctly, it's not the case that Sweden Democrat voters are, when they are working, have very low wages. I don't think you can see that actually. But again, the data is quite incomplete. The SOM has a 50% response rate, so we should be very careful in interpreting this. When it comes to class, social mobility, I'm of course very much in favor of social mobility. I'm a child of social mobility, but I think it's a very complicated message if you're a working class party to stress again and again and again. The most important thing for our policy is that you can leave the working class. So becoming a skilled working class laborer in many professions, actually, electricity and plumbing and so, that is seen as a failure of life, and that is, I think, a very complicated message to send to your voters if you pretend to be a working class party.
Very good. Then we're going to try to take an online question from Olle Torpman.
Thank you very much, Bo, for an interesting talk. I have a question about the reasons you gave for why so many young single males have become voters for SD. When you discuss these reasons, you mentioned that they experienced higher competition from immigrants. And then when you discussed reasons for why many people have started to vote for Trump or voted for Trump, referring to this book, you mentioned the same types of reasons, but now you also added that they are probably wrong, implying that there is in fact no such competition, although they experience it or they have it in their mind. So I was just curious about whether you think that Swedish SD voters are also wrong in their experience regarding the competition from immigrants, because it sounded to me as if there is this fact there, but in the American case, there is no corresponding fact to their experience. Or are the Swedes also wrong?
Yeah, there are two high-quality surveys in the United States showing that a majority of white people now think that the discrimination of whites is worse than the discrimination of African Americans or Latinos. I cannot see that this has anything to do with reality, but people vote out of perceptions, of course. And if this is the perception you have, it doesn't matter. The reality, people have an enormous propensity to adjust facts to their previous ideology or their existing ideology when it comes to voting. In Sweden, I mean, we have had problems with the housing market, of course, and many can think that immigrants are allowed to jump the queue but I don't know if that is correct or not. Since it's a very long time since I was on this market, I have no clue if this increased competition for female partners is a reality or not. I'm sorry. But of course, if you get this high influx of young men, you will get this problem. I think there is an additional problem here that I have learned from my wife. Used to be a school principal, and I've been talking a lot with school principals about this ethnic complications in schools. They say that the young Swedish boys, they are 16 to 19 or something, they are frustrated because they say that the immigrant boys have access to the Swedish girls, but they don't have access to the immigrant girls for moral reasons. So that creates a kind of tension between them. If this is also supported by facts, I don't know. This is basically hearsay or anecdotal evidence, but it seems to be the case with all this sort of honor dimensions for young women in many immigrant circles, that this could be a factor. Yes.
Thank you.
There's a follow-up here from Pontus.
Yeah. So
wait, Pontus.
Hi. This is lovely. So for many of these kinds of stories, it seems to go the opposite or very small effects in the data, right? So you talk about the queue for housing, but as you said, SD is mainly rural voters, and there's no queue for housing in rural Sweden. Similarly, we see very little, a very small effect between how much unemployment there are in districts and how much people vote for Swedish Democrats. So I guess my question is, what do you think, because I agree that these perceptions are out there and that they're part especially of the voters of Swedish Democrats. So where do you think the perception comes from? If it's not reality, like how can we determine which perception people have if it's not reality?
I've heard there is such a thing as social media. How would I know? I'm not a media expert, but yeah, this is the images that people have. I mean, there are some colleagues who in economics who say the immigration couldn't be a big thing for the increase of Sweden democratic voting, because in areas where most Sweden Democrats live, rural areas, there are not many, right? But it's the perception of they have this image of this, you know. So I think this is the wrong way to think about it. We have to go more deeply. I think we should have more research of the Rothschild type, you know, actually go and interview these people, because I have bad feelings about the survey data, especially because we have 50% response rate. Now, it's easy to, I think, it's nearby to think that many of those whose opinion we really would like to have are not answering our surveys because they don't trust us, the researchers. They think we are also supporting the corrupt elite. Yeah. So I would. My friends in anthropology, ethnology, and sociology, go and interview them and talk to them to get what's going on in their mindset. Because I think Rothschild's work is just fantastic.
Good. So I'm going to follow up, and then I'm going to let you follow up too. Just on this, I mean, this perception, I guess some of your colleagues do this kind of comparative politics. They look at other countries, and there are other countries like Finland. They also have a kind of right-wing populist party with very low immigration. So do they also have this perceived view that they have increased competition for women or jobs? Or so I mean, it seems to be, you wonder whether how effectual this is. Will this perceived thing come up irrespective if you have it or not? Or I mean, it seems that your political scientists should be able to answer this by doing comparative politics.
I haven't thought about Finland so much. I think it's important to realize that the Sweden Democrats are quite different from the other populist parties in the Nordic countries, because none of the other populist parties in the Nordic countries have this history, this brown history. You can sort of criticize them for many things, but not this one. So here I think the Sweden Democrats are a little different. I don't
But
know.
even if they're
I don't
different-
know enough about the true Finns and their ideology to answer your question. But in Denmark, at least, when the populist party went up, it was very much a question about this competition for things.
Yeah. So my point was, I mean, it's kind of irrespective of the background of the party. I mean, if that was Pontus' question, this perceived, maybe there are not this competition, or maybe it is, but this perceived things, would they come up even in countries where you have not much immigration or not? So that could be idea. That could also be follow up, but maybe there will always be some of these perceived things, but there actually is another root cause. So you just kind of try to find why is my life not going as well as I want. So that's
You're
my
looking
suspicion.
for a cause, yeah.
Yeah.
Yes, of course.
And that could.
Yeah.
So, and then there's a follow up there too.
I wonder if you've read the Peace Prize winner Maria Ressa's book, How to Stand Up to a Dictator.
Which one?
How to Stand Up to a Dictator by Maria Ressa.
No.
Because she writes about Facebook, and its impact on the rise of right-wing parties and populists. And she is so backed up with facts, and it's been documented all along. And I wonder why it was left out of this.
You can't read everything, but send me the reference and I will.
Absolutely.
Yeah, how to stand up to dictators.
Yeah,
What's her name?
Maria Ressa. She won the Nobel Peace Prize a couple of years ago, and it's extremely thorough on the impact of Facebook. She says it's the biggest threat to democracy.
Facebook.
Yeah, because of the algorithms. Yeah.
Okay, I'll look out.
Thank you.
But would Sweden Democrats be more on Facebook than other people in the world?
I don't remember.
Doesn't seem really likely. I think they are, but on social media. But would they be more on Facebook? Wouldn't they be more on TikTok and other strange things?
I will move on to the last follow-up question to this very lively discussion. And that's there. You had a follow-up question? I hope, not on you. A short follow-up is okay.
Okay, this isn't a follow-up.
Oh, no, then you have to be on the list, I'm afraid, because it's a long list. Okay, so then let's see order on this list. Moa.
Thank you. I think in one sense it's kind of been covered by this long follow-up discussion, but I guess my question was, I mean, because all of the reasons you list for the growth with Sweden Democrats, it makes sense in a way, but on the other side, like already been mentioned, some of these issues can be discussed whether they are correct, such as, I mean, as a labor market integration scholar, I don't really agree that labor market integration policies in Sweden has completely failed. I think, I mean, it can be discussed, but still the discourse is that yes, everybody agrees that it has failed, although it kind of hasn't, I would say. So I guess the question is, to what extent can we explain the growth of the Sweden Democrats primarily based on the development in Sweden and the way it's been talked about, and to what extent is this a part of this global or like Western phenomena where we've seen this like growth of, I mean, fascism, conservatism, far right? I mean, should we look to Sweden to explain this, or should we look to Europe or like the Western world in a way? And what would the reasons be if we choose the other perspective to look at this as a global phenomenon?
On your first question, well, isn't it the case that it takes a very long time for many immigrants to get a permanent job in the Swedish labor market compared to other countries? Or that is just fiction?
It's not fiction, but I mean, there's a lot of selection in migration. So I mean, you can't compare the Sweden to the US, where you typically need a green card and immigrants are very high skilled. If you look at the sort of the immigrants who actually arrive to Sweden, it can be argued that Sweden is doing a fairly good job in terms of integrating this selection of people. So it's extremely hard to make these sort of comparisons in a fair way. And if you look at the recent development, the share of immigrants who are employed are just increasing in the last couple of years. So I mean, that's why I'm saying it can be discussed. But even though it can be discussed, there's this wide agreement that labor market integration has failed. So the discourse is different from
the reality.
You know, yeah.
Okay.
And doesn't Carina Moden and Janne Jonsson's fantastic report, they show that, I mean, at the age of 30, they are in the same kind of distribution of income as people with two parents born in Sweden. So, So now you have to answer.
I have been taken by those comparative figures, but it's, of course, this is a general problem in all social science research. I mean, as a student of corruption, I have had a long conversations with my colleagues in anthropology and ethnology. They say, no, you cannot work with general theories. You know, every tribe, every city, every region is difficult. So just forget about it. And I think we have, as social scientists, to learn a little from medicine here. And if you socialize with doctors, that I just by chance have been doing, you will find an interesting thing. If you ask them about medical problems you have, they don't like to answer. Why? Not because they're not your friends, because they think it is unethical to say anything until they have examined you and taken all the tests, right? because they say every patient is unique. Still, they work a lot with general knowledge, right? There is general knowledge about, but you cannot think about the cure for the individual case until you have examined that case. So there are, we know that antibiotics is good, but some people are seriously allergic. You need to know that. And I think we as social scientists should think the same. We both need sort of overall theories where we compare 150 countries, but we cannot go from that and say this is what you should do in this specific case without very thoroughly examining that specific case. So I think country specialists, I say to my friends, anthropologists, so you want one theory of corruption per village in the world. That is 90,000, 100, 2 million theories. That is also hopeless, right? So we need both, I think. And of course, if you're going to say something about the Swedish case, you of course need specific knowledge about the specific case, yes. But still, there is some general tendencies that we have to take into account.
So we have many questions, but luckily, since Bo was so concise, we're going to get to you. But there's many questions, but we have you on the list here. And now, I think it's the gentleman there.
So thank you. Both the discussion and the presentation have been most informative so far, and I think it's been great to listen to all these points you made. One of them that I'd like to bring up was the, I think you call it democratic totalitarianism. So to what extent do we see some roots going far back in this case? You mentioned that there are few of the Nordic populist parties have brown roots, even though SD has. It's not the common occurrence, but also the idea that majority rule, simple majorities, should have a considerable influence over not just decisions, but perhaps there are other things. Is that restricted to that group, or do we see a tradition of that going further back in time, or is it a new phenomenon? This decolonization idea, in a sense.
It's absolutely not a new phenomenon. I mean, if you read about Mussolini's Italy from the 1920s, this is how they work. Of course, the Third Reich was the same, and absolutely the Soviet type of communism was totally this, although they were not democratically elected. There is this sort of idea that the majority should have the say, and you have it in the United States in a way, where judges, for example, we know you want on the Supreme Court judges from your party, and now the Republicans are doing something very, very dangerous. They are politicizing the election administration. And that is a death blow to working democracy, because if the losing side don't think that the votes have been counted in an impartial way, they will not respect the election outcome. So it's I just want to say that my point is that in a way they are not undemocratic. They are super democratic, but they are not really liberal Democrats, because liberal Democrats think of democracy in a quite restricted way and give a lot of room to independent courts, autonomous universities, autonomous cultural institutions, autonomous research institutions like this. We think this is a very important part. I'm a liberal Democrat. I'm actually a liberal socialist. But we think this is an important part of a working democracy.
But has that always been the case, even in the case of Sweden?
Yeah, I would say so. Sweden does away with systemic corruption and politicization of the public administration about 50 years before becoming a democracy. And when the Social Democrats enter government in the 1920s, they are not politicizing the public administration in this way, no. There are one or two cases, general directors for some authorities, but it's not in this massive scale as we see now in Mexico. There is one in Europe, a big exception here, and that is Austria after the war, that had this propose system. So the conservative and the Social Democrats basically divided the public administration into, we have our judges, you have yours. It was a big thing about 15 years ago in Vienna when the first non-politicized principal for a high school entered. That was a new thing. In most, for example, political science departments in Austria, you knew this was a conservative professor and this is a leftist professor. And that came from, was a kind of deal they had for not falling into the semi-civil war situation that led to the breakdown of the Austrian democracy in the 1920s. So Austria is a big... Italy has also had during the Christian Democrats, quite some politicization of the public administration. But that has been more a way, like we call clientelist, to buying votes, not actually to govern through politicized bureaucrats.
I think on that note, it's perfect to wrap up. And sorry for those who didn't have time to ask another question, but thank you very much. You can see this is probably the biggest audience we got today, so you're on to something, I think. Thank you very much.
Thank you.